Welcome back to MOVI-C Control Cabinet Products Basic to Intermediate Training. This is session number 3. We're continuing what we started in session number 2, which is overviewing the products that we're going to be discussing during this training. We talked about the 3 major branches of the MOVI-C Control Cabinet product, VFDs. We talked about MOVI-Drive Technology, MOVI-Drive System, and MOVI-Drive Modular. Now we need to move on to talk about the controllers that are commonly used with MOVI-Drive System and MOVI-Drive Modular. So let's dive in and talk about those. We offer a number of different controllers, and they come in various sizes. As you can imagine, for small systems, you don't need a giant controller, but we make some bigger ones for the really hefty multi-axis setups. So we're going to talk about how we rate their performance so you have an idea which one you might need for a given application. We rate controllers by the number and type of axes they can handle. What you'll see typically when you look at our documentation is a pair of numbers. For example, something like this, it might say this controller can handle 8 interpolated axes and 8 uninterpolated axes. Now you may look at that and say, that makes absolutely no sense to me. What is an interpolated axis and what is an uninterpolated axis? Well, let's talk about that. Let's make this help make sense. And I'm going to give you maybe a better way to understand this rating as well. An interpolated axis is an axis, in other words, a VFD connected to a motor controlling something that's generating very sophisticated motion. This might be a robotics application where the robot is performing some complicated path that's maybe goes through a bunch of curves at varying speeds. Or maybe it's a camming application where you generate this complex motion path. In situations like this, the VFD can't generate that motion all by itself. What it needs is the controller to tell it to go step by step and generate that complex motion profile. That means the controller's doing a lot of calculating. It's using a lot of computing horsepower to generate that path. That is an interpolated axis. A colleague of mine gave a really good example of this that you can relate to. Imagine that I took you and placed you in the middle of an empty room, and I blindfolded you. And I said, now I'm going to take you to a specific spot in the room. And I tell you, okay, take 1 step forward, now turn to the right 10 degrees, take 5 steps forward really fast, now pause for 3 seconds, now turn 7 degrees to the left and run for 2 seconds. Basically, I'm guiding you through this complex motion. And because you're blindfolded, you sort of have to trust me that I'm taking you where you're going. And when we're all done, I say, okay, take off the blindfold, you're there. And wow, you really are. That's what an interpolated axis is. The VFD is just sort of blindly following complicated commands coming from the controller. So, as you can guess, if you're doing an interpolated kind of motion, you require the controller to be doing a lot. It's got to have a lot of horsepower. Now, an uninterpolated axis is a really simple thing. That would be like if I took you in the middle of that empty room, I didn't blindfold you, and I just said, walk to the corner. I basically just told you where to go, and you went there, and it was totally up to you to do that. VFDs can do things like that. They can do basic motion just by being told to start and stop. That's an uninterpolated axis. The controller just has to issue a few simple commands, and the VFD can do the rest. So that is what an uninterpolated axis is. It's an axis performing basic motion where the VFD, or if it's a MOVI-Drive modular, an access module, is managing the profile. So that's the difference. And applications could be just all uninterpolated axes. It could be all interpolated, or it could be a mixture. So the controller rating is saying what the computing power of the controller is. So you can guess the total number of axes is 16, but you definitely can't do 16 interpolated axes. It just does not have that power. Now you may be asking the question, okay, what if there are no interpolated axes? Does that mean I can only do 8 uninterpolated? I'm going to give you an alternative definition that I think is better and makes this clearer. This controller can run 16 axes total, of which 8 may be interpolated. Now, if you have no interpolated axes, then all 16 can be uninterpolated. So that's how I'm going to be showing ratings now. I'm going to give you the grand total of axes, and I'll tell you how many can be interpolated. So let's look at the controller models. Right now there are 4. SEW is going to be replacing the last one there, the most powerful, with a new one which is coming out, but it's not out yet, so there will be a changeover. But of course you may see the big one in existing products. So let's start on the left and work to the right in levels of increasing power. The controller standard is the simplest, the least expensive as well. It supports a total of 8 axes, of which 2 may be interpolated. The next one, the advanced, is a little more powerful. It can handle 16 axes total, of which 8 may be interpolated. The progressive can handle 32 axes total, of which 16 can be interpolated. And the power, which currently is our most powerful one, can handle 64 axes total, of which 32 may be interpolated. So these are the controllers that we offer. So they progressively have more power, they can handle more axes. And by the way, if you have questions about the size you need, you can speak to one of our sales representatives, you can call our regional engineering group, and there are tools out there that will help you calculate based on your application which one is the right one for you. Now I'm going to mention something very important. These are the 2 largest controllers we currently sell, the progressive controller and the power controller. They're actually 2 controllers in one. They're different from the 2 lower powered ones. These are actually double controllers inside. And the question is, why do we do this? Well, let me explain. One is sort of like a regular SCW Eurodrive PLC type controller. But the other one is an embedded PC that runs Microsoft Windows in parallel. In other words, it's kind of an industrial PC. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, a couple reasons. You could use the PC side for engineering. You could actually put a copy of MOVI-C in there and use it to engineer your system. Or it could run an HMI, a human-machine interface, a user interface of some kind that maybe drives a screen and gives you a graphical display, maybe with a touch screen that you could control. This just gives you extra capability for sophisticated machines where you want to have that extra computing power. The PC side and the PLC side have separate engineering ports because they're almost like 2 controllers separated. But they do have a virtual network inside where they can communicate with each other. So it's really a nice extra feature that you can use if you need it. I will mention as well that the Windows side is optional. If you want to use it, you have to pay for a license of Microsoft Windows. It comes on a separate memory card. You would get 2 memory cards. One would have our firmware on it, the other would have Windows on it. But if you don't need that capability, but you do need the powerful controller, you don't have to buy the Windows side. You can buy just the SCW side, and you'll get just 1 memory card with just our firmware. So it is very flexible what you can buy. Let's talk about some of the options that are available to support the MOVI-C products. All systems require not just the base hardware, but usually lots of options that can tweak the hardware for specific application needs. We're going to start with option cards. All of the products you've looked at have had at least 1 expansion slot. Some have 2. You can put cards in there to extend the built-in capability. For example, if you need more digital inputs and outputs, you can buy a CID21A, which has 4 extra digital inputs and 4 digital outputs. Or maybe you need more than that. You could buy a CIO21A, which has 4 digital inputs, 4 digital outputs, and some analog inputs and outputs if you need to deal with, for example, voltages. So that's out there. What if you need 2 encoder interfaces? Maybe you need the built-in one to connect to a motor encoder, and then you want to connect up to a laser linear encoder as well. Well, no problem. Buy a CES11A and connect that up to your second encoder. That will work fine. And what if you need functional safety? You have applications that require safety features. Well, we have a whole line of functional safety cards that have things like I/O and encoder interfaces and so forth. Some of these cards are partially safety cards and partially standard. In other words, one of the interfaces is safety rated, the other is just standard. So be sure you know what you're buying. Be sure you speak to someone who's an expert in functional safety. SCW has a department with functional safety experts who can talk to you knowledgeably about setting up your system. But these are cards that are available. And just a little clue there to tell that they're functional safety or that they have that capability. Notice the little yellow shield-shaped symbol on it. That clues you in it's a functional safety card or that there are functional safety features in it. They also have another nifty little feature. Once they're commissioned, they store the commissioning information in a little memory module which is swappable. That means that if a card dies, you can replace it and then swap the memory module, and the commissioning with the safety commissioning goes with it. And that means you don't have to go back through that whole process again. So that's definitely something that in the maintenance side of things is very desirable. All right, what about field bus cards? Well, of course, as you know, MOVI-Drive System and MOVI-Drive Modular get field bus communications through their controllers, but MOVI-Drive Technology has a field bus card slot, and you can order it with different field bus cards. These are the cards available. There's a combined Ethernet IP and Modbus TCP card. That's a very popular one. If you're in a Profinet world, then we have a Profinet card. And if you want to support legacy Profi capabilities, there's a Profi bus card, which is used for those older legacy applications that rely on that classic field bus that's been around for decades. So we support field buses very well at SCW Eurodrive. We offer keypads. Many customers like to keep a keypad around. It's a useful diagnostic device. It can also be used as sort of a simple display, and it can be used for basic engineering in some cases. Now, we sell 2 keypad styles. This is our less expensive one, the CBG11A. It is a monochrome display, and it's used for just doing simple startups. It doesn't have as many capabilities. You can also see it gives you a simple display as well of the status of the drive. You can use it for manual mode, for testing, or just forcing the drive to run. And you can do backups and restores with it. It has built-in memory, so it can back up a VFD and hold it in its memory. And then you could use that as a restore device in an emergency. We sell a second keypad, which is really nice, the CBG21A. This is graphical and full color. You can use it to do full startups. You can do sophisticated startups with it. It's a lot of fun. We'll be doing one in one of our labs down the road. It too can do the manual mode capabilities for testing the drive. It can give you a status display. You can also use it for backups and restores. It can store multiple backups in the keypad, and it's also good for diagnostics. So these are really nice. My recommendation in a big setup, you should at least have one of these somewhere. Some people put one on every drive, but having at least one handy, it's just really a great tool. And here's a bonus. Both of these keypads, both the less expensive one and the more expensive one, include a USB interface. It's on the top. You can't see it. You plug it into a standard USB cable. I believe it's like the mini USB connection on there, and that gives you access to the internal memory. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, it's simple. If you've run a backup, you could then plug a cable in, hook it to your PC. It will behave kind of like a giant memory stick, and you can download that backup and archive it somewhere as a file on a PC. And that is really a smart thing to do, keeping an archive of a VFD setup. So that is one thing you can do with that USB connection, but there's something else you can do as well. You can use that as a USB interface to a PC on a MOVI drive technology. You can use this, in other words, as an engineering interface. So if your MOVI drive technology has the keypad, just plug a USB cable into it, put the other end to your PC, fire up MOVI Suite, and you can get in there and engineer the drive that way. That's a really handy tool. So again, if you've got a keypad and a cable, you're good to go. You can use that with a PC. So a handy thing to have. I highly recommend that you give yourself that capability. Now, besides the exciting electronic accessories, we also sell a whole line of electrical accessories to deal with application-specific issues. To choose these, coordinate with an engineer because many of these require engineering-specific information. We offer things like line filters to clean up incoming power. The incoming power is kind of dirty. Then you might need this. This works with only certain sizes. It's used for sizes 4 and up. We sell chokes, which can suppress distortions and peaks on power. We sell an output filter, which can kind of clean up the output to make it more sinusoidal. There is a little caveat there. You don't want to use it in vertical applications that are angled or things like hoists because it can reduce output current, which could cause something to fall or slide. Not a good idea. It's also not suitable if you're running the motor in what's called CFC mode. Our MOVI-C control cabinet products have 4 different motor control modes. CFC is one of them. You should not use that with an output filter. We will talk about CFC later. So if you don't know what that is, just hang on, you'll learn a lot about it before we're done. There are output chokes. This keeps the VFD from radiating a lot of electrical noise from unshielded cables out into the environment. This is a good idea sometimes, so if you need that feature, we offer it. We sell brake resistors. Remember I mentioned regenerative energy, how in some cases you recapture that and reuse it. In many applications, you don't need to do that. You just need to deal with it. And a braking resistor is a less expensive, simple way of dealing with it. It takes regenerative energy when the motor becomes a generator. It turns it into heat in the braking resistor, and it just floats away into the environment. So we sell braking resistors of varying sizes for different VFDs. And we also sell what are called thermal breakers. These are like circuit breakers to protect the braking resistor if it gets too hot. It can sort of shut things down, and it's capable of sending a signal to the VFD to say, hey, the braking resistor got too hot, I just shut down. So these are some of the electrical accessories. If you question whether you need them or not, speak to one of our application engineers in our regional engineering group, and they will be happy to guide you. All right, a few miscellaneous matters we're going to just tidy up here. Let's talk about backup. When you configure a VFD, you may have to do a lot of custom settings in complex applications. What if that VFD takes a lightning strike or something like that and dies? And you've got to get a machine back up and running because you're losing $10,000 an hour because that line is absolutely mission critical. What can you do? Well, there are several things you can do, but be aware of this. If you've got a MOVI drive technology, it stores all its information on a removable memory module, which is right there. You see the handle there? Just give that a tug when the drive is off, pull it out. There's the memory module. Get yourself a replacement unit, wire it up, and then insert the memory module and turn it on, and you should just be back up and running with all the parameters correctly set. So that is one feature that's available in MOVI-Drive technology. Now, what if you've got a MOVI-Drive system or a MOVI-Drive modular? They back themselves up on the memory card that's in the controller. It'll either be an SD card in the smaller controllers or a CFast card in the bigger ones. You probably have seen SD cards in digital cameras. They're very common. Anyway, everything is on the card, and that will have the whole configuration. So again, what you would do is you'd replace the failed equipment, wire everything up, pop that memory card in, turn it on, and what the controller will do is it will recognize that it's got a replacement system. It'll go to that card, it'll start reconstructing, and it will take a few minutes depending how big the system is, but eventually everything will be reconfigured, the parameters will be set, and you can put it back into service. So that is a handy, useful feature. Of course, I've also mentioned that you can make backups in other ways. For example, MOVI-Drive technology, you could use that keypad to make a backup in the keypad and then transfer that into a PC. So there are multiple paths to backing up your equipment. And I do urge you, if you have a complicated system and a mission-critical application, make backups. Because as we know, if a line stops, that's money that you're losing. Let's talk about encoders for a second. Encoders are feedback devices that provide information to the VFD. Some applications need them, some don't. For very simple applications, you don't need an encoder. But if you need to know exactly how fast the motor's turning and control it very precisely, or if you're doing a positioning application where you're moving to some specific spot down to the millimeter, then you need a feedback device. And there are many kinds, but they're called encoders usually. SEW Eurodrive devices support encoders. So if your motor's got an encoder or you've got an external encoder of some kind, then we should be able to talk to it and take advantage of it. MOVI-Drive technology, MOVI-Drive system, and MOVI-Drive modular access modules have built-in encoder interfaces, and you can see one circled there. That's a single access module with MOVI-Drive system and MOVI-Drive technology. It's kind of underneath. It's not as visible, so I showed this one here. And the nice thing is there are many encoder standards out there where they communicate using different protocols and wiring connections. Our encoder interface supports multiple encoder types, and here are the standards that the built-in one supports. We support TTL RS422, we support HTL, we support sine cosine, we support the proprietary brand Hyperface, we support SEW's RS485, which is similar in functionality to Hyperface, although it is not Hyperface. And we support what is called a resolver, which is an inexpensive encoder-like device that's found in some servo motors. We have covered our bases very, very thoroughly so that it is possible for you to connect to just about everything if you've got the right cable. If you need expansion capabilities, you need a second encoder interface. And if you look at that access module, notice there's a card in there with a second encoder interface. We offer a number of these. We offer a standard one. There's also one that's part of a safety card. Again, be sure you double check to find out if it's a safe encoder interface or just a standard one. Be sure you know what you're using. But you can add a second one if you need two encoders. They support TTL, RS422, HTL, sine cosine Hyperface, SEW RS485, and they support three others that the built-in does not, SSI, NDAT, and CANopen. So there's some extra ones. So do note the differences. Notice they don't support a resolver. You cannot use a resolver on the expansion card. You can use it on the built-in. So there are some differences. I'm also going to just mention something as an aside. Remember, with double access modules on MOVI-Drive Modular, where you have two motor controls in one, you cannot put encoder expansion cards into those. because they already have either two built-in encoders or two DDI interfaces. They don't have both at the same time, but the firmware can only support a total of two. So that means you can't add cards to those and get 3 or 4. It doesn't do that with a double access module. So double access modules have a few gotchas, but single access modules can certainly take 2. MOVI-Drive system can take 2. MOVI-Drive technology can take 2. And all those have DDI interfaces as well. So there's a lot of flexibility, but there are just a few gotchas you need to be aware of so you don't make a mistake. So an important note here, people always ask me this question in class. I'm going to mention this. They say, okay, if the VFD's got an encoder interface and a DDI connector, which can talk to an encoder and a DDI motor, does that mean I can get 2 encoders that way and not spend any extra money? Use the DDI plus the built-in encoder interface. I'm sorry, you can't do that. Okay, you can't use the built-in encoder and the DDI at the same time. That's because the system firmware can work with either one or the other, but not both. If you need a second encoder, then you're going to have to add an expansion card for that. So there are ways to do it, but you can't kind of cheat by using DDI and the VFDs built in. All right, just something to know. And remember, I've said this once, I'll say it again just to be sure you understand it. Double access modules can't have additional encoder and cards installed because of firmware limitations. So on those notes and on that big gulp of information, we have finished session number 3. That's given you a big overview of the products that we're covering and discussing and introducing. If you're really tired of all that, go out and get a big coffee and recharge yourself, and we'll then dive in and start getting into some of the greater details of the products that we're going to be working with in session 4. So see you then.